So glucose regulation, this is before we get into the next ratio, we are going to talk about this because I think it's super important. So put on your thinking caps, think about a stress response. You've got a client that's in fight or flight. What is going on? Broad overview. What do you think's happening in the body?
Oh gosh, the cortisol is being released, glucose is increasing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just leads to more inflammation, oxidative stress,
No,
damage,
I mean, that's basically it, right? We've got
right?
cortisol, we've got adrenaline, the body's pumping, we're getting ready to run from the bear. Glucose is out, it's heading to the muscles, right?
Muscles, yep.
Yep, everybody agrees. So we know the body relies on glucose for energy in a stress response, right? And glucose is going to rush into those large muscles, it's going to fill them up, but there's a but. There's a big but. Um, Cortisol, one of the effects of cortisol is it delays insulin secretion. So, how is glucose getting where it needs to go if insulin secretion is being delayed? What's going on in the body? Anybody done a deep dive into glucose regulation lately?
All digestive secretions are halted.
Right. What about insulin? How's glucose getting into those muscle cells if insulin is being delayed? Anybody know?
Hmm.
Hmm. So glucose quickly fills muscle cells. Cortisol delays insulin secretion. So if there's less insulin, how does glucose get into the cell to give you quick energy? All right, we'll just keep going. So do cells need insulin present to uptake glucose?
Obviously, no.
Obviously not. Obviously not. Anybody know how that happens?
I need a valve, Anna.
Okay, so there's four main types of glucose transporters. In addition to insulin, you've got GLUT1 that really, glucose transport, GLUT 1, 2, 3, and 4. So GLUT1 is a general transporter. It's used when it's needed. GLUT2, independent of insulin, right? Delivers glucose to the digestive tract, the liver, and the pancreas. GLUT3 delivers glucose to the central nervous system and the brain. And GLUT4 delivers glucose to the heart, muscles, and fat cells. GLUT4 uses insulin. Okay, so insulin binds to this receptor, which signals the cascade. These little things are GLUT4, right? So they're all in this vesicle. GLUT4 builds this little raft, which then goes to the outside membrane, right? And then once they get here, glucose entry is permitted into the cell. So it uses insulin and glucose is permitted. Everybody get that? There's like lots of other things that happen in here, but this is the bare bones of GLUT4.
So are some of the medications, are there some of the medications, or do you know, that trigger this particular, like this receptor?
I'm not sure.
I just wondered if metformin, if that's part of it, because it has to do with insulin resistance and the
Right.
insulin. So I was wondering I've never really looked into it. And Deborah's not on the
That would
call.
be, yeah, that would be that's a Deb
That'd be a Deborah
question.
question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's way too many diabetes medications for me to even try and keep up with.
But the other three don't use insulin. They don't use insulin, right? They use group
Right,
4 is the only one that uses insulin.
right.
Okay.
Can you
Um,
go back a slide for 1 minute from here?
yep.
One back. So I'm
One.
sorry. So heart, muscle, and fat cells.
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. So if magnesium is low, where are we? Skip that one. I should have deleted that slide. I copied it and did not delete that slide. So ignore that slide. GLUT1 is a general transporter used when needed. GLUT2, GLUT3 is not required for those three. And insulin is not needed for glucose transport into most brain cells. So general, it can be used as a general transporter. The digestive tract, liver, and pancreas doesn't need insulin, and the central nervous system and brain. Those three glucose transporters do not need insulin. So remember, insulin's job is energy storage, not necessarily glucose lowering, although it can and does assist with that in the heart, muscle, and fat. So if you're thinking that insulin's job is to lower glucose, then you need to go back and review everything you know.
So
Um,
what lowers the glucose is that it lowers it from the bloodstream because you don't have it in the bloodstream anymore because it's been stored in the cell. But the blood sugar itself is not, or the glucose itself is not acted on in the bloodstream.
right. Yeah. I mean, insulin's job is going to come out, and especially if, its primary job is not to lower blood sugar, although it does that, right? It's not its job. So GLUT2 is also insulin dependent, all right? Since glucose enters beta cells via GLUT2, right? So GLUT2 works on the pancreas, digestive tract, liver, and pancreas. So if the pancreas needs glucose, right? So glucose is going to enter the beta cells via GLUT2. And then it's got the ATP that's going to be required to close the calcium channel, which is required to depolarize the membrane. And then the calcium channels are going to open and calcium's going to enter the cell, and that brings about insulin release. So I've got a slide here,
Good. I
okay?
was like, wait a minute, I got to process that.
Right? So, if you go through the steps, right, you've got to have, if there's a low glucose, right, in a resting state, GLUT2 is not going to let it in. It's just, this is going to be the resting state. Glucose comes in, right, through GLUT2. You've got ATP that's needed to close the potassium channel. That needs ATP to make that happen. Depolarizes the membrane that allows calcium in, and the influx of calcium releases insulin.
So you've got to have, so if your glucose is not elevated, then GLUT2 receptors do not, they don't,
Right.
what makes, I mean, do we know what level? What level does a GLUT2, I mean, what's the difference? How do you define high glucose there? Do you know?
No, I don't.
Okay. So there's something in the
And-
bloodstream. There's
right,
something in the bloodstream that determines your glucose level is too high. And
right,
so GLUT2 receptors become
right,
active.
right. Glucokinase, which affects the mitochondria to release ATP, which is going to close this channel. It's going to depolarize the membrane, which opens because the calcium channel is voltage gated. So once this depolarizes, it opens the calcium channel. Calcium comes into the cell and acts to release insulin.
To release insulin into the bloodstream then?
For the right. This is a beta cell inside the pancreas.
Oh, okay, that's a beta cell. Okay, that's a
Right.
beta cell.
Beta
Okay.
cells inside the
Right. Okay.
pancreas.
All right.
So inside the pancreas, when the body senses that there's a high glucose state,
Okay.
makes the ATP required to close the channel, which is required to depolarize the membrane, which opens the calcium gate and releases, then acts on the cell to release the insulin.
Okay. So that's probably happening at the same time that the GLUT4 receptors are doing their thing, right? To
Mhm.
the other tissues
Yep.
in the bloodstream.
Yeah.
Okay.
So GLUT4 delivers glucose to the heart, muscles, and fat cells, but it is still not fully 100% insulin dependent. So how can we get glucose immediately into the cell without insulin and still using GLUT4? So muscle contractions, exercise pulls GLUT4 into GLUT4 vesicles to the membrane for instant access to glucose, and this in turn supports insulin sensitivity. So it's another lovely thing here. You've got GLUT4. When the muscles contract, GLUT4 translocates, increases glucose transport via an insulin independent pathway. So this pathway does not need insulin. So that's why one of the best things you can do to lower postprandial glucose numbers, so after you eat,
Mhm.
is exercise. Because it's not dependent on insulin. It will pull glucose into muscle cells independent of insulin,
Okay, now that complete. Now this all makes sense.
right?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's ever used the CGMs, you
Mm-hmm.
see it firsthand. Yep.
So how is this involved with an HTMA?
Well, I just was like, okay, good, we're done with exercise. That's good.
Yay. All right, so let's go back. Let me get out of this PowerPoint and into this one. Back to the beginning. Present this one. Ta-da. This is going. All righty. Everybody see HTMA now?
Mhm.
All right. Oh, it's from, I'm looking at the meeting chat here, and it's got like the historical chat for the meeting. So I was very confused there for a moment because it had a message from Kristen, and I'm like, she's not here. I'm so confused. I don't know why it's doing that. Zoom, don't confuse me. All right, so we're going to talk now about the calcium magnesium ratio. And so remember, why is calcium important to this? Here's your resources again. So we've completed sodium potassium ratio and the sodium magnesium ratio. Do you guys remember what those signify?
Sodium potassium is the most important one. That's the big thing I remember. That's
So
the vital versus death one.
yes, that's the vitality ratio. And then the sodium magnesium ratio is the what ratio? What do we call it? What is that one?
I don't remember.
That one's the adrenal ratio.
Okay.
Okay. But the sodium potassium pump is the super important, right? That's why this is the vitality ratio, and the other one is adrenal health. That's both stress related, right? I mean, but
Well,
right.
it's stressful if you're not vital, so to speak.
Right. It is very stressful if you're not vital. So what does the calcium magnesium ratio represent?
Something muscular. Heart,
It
cardiovascular,
is cardiovascular and
bone
I
health,
guess
skeletal.
we always want to associate calcium with bone, but what did we just talk about?
Insulin. Glucose.
Glucose metabolism. Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
metabolic?
Yes. It is a metabolic glucose ratio. So blood sugar and cardiovascular health. So that's what I want you to think of when you think of the calcium magnesium ratio. So we must have enough calcium for the pancreas to release insulin. And we have to have enough magnesium to keep the calcium where it should be. So the ratio should be around 7. And there's small windows around the optimum, right? So, I mean, if you're varying a couple points in either direction with this ratio, not a huge deal. But if it's low, we're going to be tending towards hyperglycemia. And if it's high, we're going to be tending towards hypoglycemia. So think about the ratio and what it means. When it's high, we're saying there's more calcium relative to magnesium, right? We did this last time when I actually put the ratios up and with the sodium and the potassium, and I made the sodium big and the potassium little, and then I switched it around. So when you think about it, a high ratio, calcium to magnesium, means there's more calcium, right? And we need calcium to go into the beta cells to release the insulin. So if there's a lot of calcium going into the cells, right, we're going to be able to drive a more insulin release. Does that make sense?
So does that make the cell more insulin sensitive?
Um, it it allows the insulin to be released. Yes. So if there isn't enough calcium to do that, then we can have insulin not being released at all. It's not as much about the receptors as it is about how much insulin the beta cells are going to be able to
Produce?
excrete. So when low, we're saying there's less calcium relative to magnesium. That doesn't mean that magnesium is high, right? It's a relative number. Ratios are relative. So think about estrogen and progesterone. When we view estrogen, right? We talk about estrogen and progesterone all the time. When we view estrogen relative to progesterone, we can also view it in an absolute form. What are we thinking when we're looking at estrogen and progesterone? What do we call that? When we have more estrogen relative to progesterone?
Estrogen dominance.
Estrogen dominance. Does that necessarily mean estrogen is way high?
No.
No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. It just means relative to progesterone, right? It's dominant. And which one seems to be affected easier? When you think about it, which one,
What do you mean? Which one is easier
which one?
to go in and change?
Yeah,
Well, progesterone probably, because I mean, if you it's going to have a bigger effect because there's usually it's a
might
lower.
have a bigger effect, but which one's easier to change? Which one becomes dominant more often?
Well, obviously that's estrogen.
Right, right. So estrogen is going to be able to vary wildly. Progesterone is a steadier hormone. It's not as easy to affect and move. That's why we have estrogen dominance, and estrogen can go way up, right? So I want you to think of it the same way when you're thinking about the different minerals, right? Um, Progesterone is like the calming, steady hormone, right? Estrogen is just kind of wild and crazy. Um, so in the same way, calcium is easier to be pushed high. So we can accumulate a lot of calcium in the body, and magnesium is way easier to be lost from the body. Um, so there's a lot of different things that are going to be able to affect a magnesium level. Stress, right? Stress is going to burn through magnesium. And then when stress happens and you lose magnesium, you're going to raise calcium. Um, Excess antagonistic minerals. So when minerals are in balance, calcium and magnesium work together. But when they get out of balance, they can get way out of balance, and then it becomes antagonistic. Toxic metals can reduce magnesium, raise calcium levels. Vitamin D intake, unbound copper raises calcium, right? Poor soil, when we're not getting as much magnesium in, um, magnesium can go down, that can raise calcium. And 100 more reasons, because magnesium is everywhere, right?
So, Joe, is that a relative raising or like an actual raising of calcium? Like, is it that
On
estrogen
an
dominance kind of raising or?
Yeah, you can, I mean, and we can see on a HTMA where calcium can just get really crazy high. So if magnesium is low and calcium elevates, it's going to keep the magnesium low. And it's going to just cause that skewing. Um,
But isn't it more of like a displacement almost versus I mean, it's almost like the magnesium is being, or the calcium is displacing the magnesium because it's not there, because it's being
well,
used
I mean, it's
elsewhere.
harder to get rid of calcium. That's why calcium, when we have excess calcium, right? We don't get magnesium stones in the body. We don't get magnesium buildup in the body. We get calcium buildup, right? When calcium's not able to stay in the bone and go where it's needed, we don't really excrete it as easily as we do magnesium. So we're going to lose magnesium where calcium's big and lumbering and hard to budge. So we can get things like calcium shells and calcium stones and calcified arteries. Um, and you don't see that with magnesium.
What is a calcium shelf? I've heard that term. What versus a
So
calcium?
calcium shells happen when calcium goes way high. And I'm trying to find um, I don't know if Jen actually did like a PowerPoint on calcium shells. But you can look up information on calcium shells. Calcium shells happen when there's stress and trauma to the point where somebody starts like building a wall, and it's almost in an emotionally walled off state. So once you get calcium for whatever reason and you get this stress, right? Because stress does affect this, right? It's one of the big things that can affect it. You can go back and look at all the things that can affect this, where we will lose magnesium and raise calcium. And if that stressful state becomes a chronic thing, um, you can really have someone who, when a lot of people that are just like, things just bounce off of them. It doesn't affect them. They just, you know, they don't react. They're like steady and hard and like that. You could build that emotional wall. And it's actually, you can see it on an HTMA. And you can see it because things don't move easily in and out of cells anymore. They can actually become calcified also, right? Because you need that calcium, you need the cell membrane to be healthy to let the calcium channels open and close. And when that, they can get hardened also and full of calcium. And that's called a calcium shell. It kind of builds up on the outside of cells. And there's a lot you can see it. It's an emotional pattern that you can see when you talk to people. And you'll start to recognize it. Especially when you see it on the HTMA and it lines up with their trauma and you're like, yep, calcium shell. I have a couple, I'll see if I can find them before we get off the call today, and I'll show you some HTMAs that have a calcium shell on them. I have a couple. So an elevated ratio suggests that insulin secretion has increased. So we're seeing more insulin come out and blood sugar may be too low. And how do we know this?
Well, I guess they get symptomatic. Is that what you mean from
Mhm.
symptoms?
Yeah, we can see it in symptoms, right? We can
Hypoglycemia?
see, yeah. We can see them having the low blood sugar episodes. Um, their insulin levels on their blood work might be up. Their fructosamine is probably up. Their glycomark can show that they've got really highs and lows. Um, so I mean, you're going to be able to see some of, the lows. A depressed ratio suggests a possibility of less insulin being secreted and blood sugars running too high. So right? Um,
You know how that would look? So I'm looking at the beta cells here,
mhm.
and in a type 1 diabetic, the beta cells are either not functioning or destroyed. So is
There's
that
no insulin being made.
right? So therefore, giving that person or that person having more calcium. I mean, I guess the question is, are the beta cells actually destroyed or are they just not functioning well so that they aren't making insulin?
There's like C-peptides can tell you, like a C-peptide marker is
Right.
a marker of how well the beta cells are functioning.
Okay. So if they're just not producing insulin, what happens to
This
that
isn't gonna,
calcium?
well, I mean, calcium's used other places. It's just not, I mean, if they don't have well functioning beta cells, and the calcium's not coming in to release insulin, this isn't happening.
Okay. All right. So I mean, I just wonder like that whole metabolic chain with the GLUT2, because obviously you're going to have high glucose because the insulin is not working, right?
Right.
So if you have the high glucose, is the GLUT2 still going to take up the glucose and go through all that metabolic channels and depolarize and everything and then get to the point where,
There's no insulin there to release.
right,
They're
and the
not making
calcium opens up
insulin,
the channel, but there's just no insulin there to release. Is that what happens?
probably.
Okay.
And I mean, and it's different. I mean, there's stress mediated high glucose levels. I mean, it's not all about insulin, right? So you can have other ways. You've got people that are eating the good diet and all these other things, and they still have high glucose levels. And it has nothing to do with whether the pancreas is functioning or not. It's mediated by other mechanisms in the body.
Right.
So hyperglycemic tendency versus hypo, this is where we can turn to the client, right? And when we're looking at, what we're seeing on an HTMA, and we can ask them what their diet's like. What is their stress level like? And this is also where we can use a glucometer or a CGM and seek out a pattern. So I don't know if you guys have ever used just a glucometer to look at the different patterns in blood sugar. So right before they eat, no matter what it is, you're going to have them take a reading. Now it can be 80 or it can be 300. It doesn't matter, right? But then you're going to check it an hour later and then 2 hours after. And if they've gotten a rise in blood sugar and it hasn't returned, if it goes below baseline, they're having hypoglycemia, right? Where they're having the highs followed by the lows after their meal. And then, if it doesn't return back to baseline and it stays elevated, they're having hyperglycemic incidents. And then it's very easy for you to say, is it food related? Is it something they're eating? Is it stress related? Is it because they're, they're not moving their body. So you can start working with what's going to make this number here be more in line with where it should be, and not too low and not too high. So it should be, I mean, Jen always said 25 to 30 points. So if it was 80 here and, went up to 125 here, right, you should be able to get it back down to 100 and have it be within 25 points of where it was here. Any questions about that, guys?
So basically what she was saying is the blood sugar or the blood sugar or glucose level shouldn't rise more than 25 points in that
Well, they
first.
might rise, but you want him to come back down to somewhere within, I mean, it's going to go up to what it goes up to, but it should come back down to in this range here. It shouldn't be elevated high.
Right.
It should like go 25 to 30 points above what it was before. So if it was 100, it goes up to 200, it should come back down to 125 or 130 and be here. You don't want it higher and you don't want it lower. You want it to come back down to as close to baseline as you can get without dipping below.
Mhm.
So the blood sugar ratio is super important as it helps us understand how an imbalance in the minerals can affect very specific HPA axis dysregulation. So I don't know if you guys have seen this brain graph before. Tracy recommended a book. Oh, let me see if I have it. I do. This is from Thomas Williams. Spelled Guilliams. This one, the role of stress in the HPTGA axis.
Spell
HPA.
the last name again, Joe?
Williams, but it's spelled Guilliams from the
Okay.
Point Institute, and I know Tracy recommended it.
Right. That's the only place you can get that one too. You have to go to Point Institute really
Yeah.
to always find that.
And it's like $35, but it goes through this graph. This is his thing. It talks about all cortisol and but yeah, this is his graph. It is fantastic. I use it all the time. I've even showed it to patients. I'm like, you don't have to understand all this, but right here in this orange part, right? Glycemic dysregulation, it's going to cause more stress and it's just going to be the same thing. So what's going on? Do you have poor diet choices? Is there insulin resistance, stress eating, low physical activity, meal timing, like all these things that go into create insulin resistance and, high glucose meals and low fiber meals is going to cause stress. And then it affects all these other things. So you need to understand what's going on. And that's where, the HTMA is it's going to be a 3 or 4 month window of what's going on. It's not like a blood glucose level, which is just an instantaneous, this is what's going on right now. When you look at this ratio, this is what the body's been doing for 3 to 4 months. It's kind of like an A1C, right? So it's not just it's this, so it's definitely that. This is generally where you've been, what's going on, what's happened in the last 3 or 4 months. So you can have an idea of a deeper picture, a deeper understanding. Calcium flooding into a blood vessel, endothelial cell will trigger off a signaling cascade that will lead to increased vascular tone and increased blood pressure. With low intakes of magnesium or insulin resistance or both, extracellular blood and intracellular levels of magnesium are going to be compromised. So suboptimally low extracellular levels of magnesium will allow the calcium channels to stay open, allowing an influx of calcium into cells. So having an optimal level of magnesium allows this mineral to act as a calcium channel blocker.
That's so interesting because you think about, and I wish Deborah was on here because she could probably address it more, but you know,
Mhm.
the calcium blockers that you use as antihypertensives.
Right.
So, but I've never heard of that having necessarily an impact on your insulin level.
Well, because calcium, I mean, it's part of it, right? There's magnesium has so many jobs in the body, but calcium only has a few,
Mhm.
right? So, when the calcium magnesium ratio is off,
Right.
not only, yeah, go ahead.
That's why I'm sure that makes total sense in that statement right there. That's why it decreases your blood pressure because it blocks that calcium channel
Hmm.
that is going to increase your vascular tone.
Right.
Hmm.
So not only are we looking at it on that side of being, involved in glucose metabolism, you've got to look at it as being, here you have the extracellular calcium, calcium's being blocked. If magnesium goes in and blocks the calcium channel, this is how that works. If you need the visual of the last slide.
So again, I guess that explains also why, because that magnesium is acting as a calcium blocker there, right?
Right.
So that's why part of why magnesium is so essential when you have hypertension
Hmm.
to make sure there's not a deficiency there.
Right.
Okay.
It may seem natural to give magnesium, but the full picture of the person is still important, right? So if magnesium is going to inhibit aldosterone, what could that mean for your client?
Well, are they male or female? Wouldn't that have an effect?
What's the difference?
Well, aldosterone is the male sex hormone, isn't it?
No, that's testosterone.
Oh, no.
Aldosterone is what controls sodium
Potassium at the
and
kidney level.
Okay,
potassium
right.
at the kidney
Okay.
level. So you want to look at sodium potassium ratio. You want to see stress, right? How many times have you guys ever had a client that does not tolerate magnesium? You give them a little bit of magnesium and they can't tolerate it.
When you say can't tolerate, what do you mean by that?
Um, it doesn't do what you expect it to do.
No, I don't know. I had a client who tried one of the bone formulas and she's like, made me nauseous. It could have been a combination of a bunch of things in there.
Well, a
So,
lot of times if you've got burnout, right, and your
mm,
body and you're already in that place and you try to give them magnesium, it and then it inhibits aldosterone and then you're right and they can start feeling, having issues.
okay.
So, I've had clients that like magnesium just you want it to say that it made them calm, but it didn't. It actually kind of stirred up some anxiety in them.
Mm,
Um, and it just didn't have the effect you wanted to. And this is where you have to like think, what if they were already low in magnesium,
okay.
right? And so they were already having some, right? So they have low magnesium, which is going to give them higher calcium, right?
Mm.
Which is already going to be monking with their with their blood pressure and everything else. What would you do for those people instead of magnesium? What do they need? What's your first line then?
Maybe it's a vitamin D.
Well,
They get
you
more
need
salt,
maybe
like sodium, potassium, right?
Right. Yeah. You would definitely want to support their sodium. Start with Soleil water or something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Instead.
would you
Okay.
want to give them K2 to help drive the calcium into the bone or out of the soft tissue?
Possibly. I mean, this is where you have to look at, what else is going on,
Mm-hmm.
what else is happening. Go back to, well, sorry, go back here and say what's going on, right? Because if they have stress and toxic metals and are taking too much vitamin D and have unbound copper and are eating a crap diet, and that's all raising their calcium levels and it's pushing the magnesium out anyway. So let me stop sharing my screen and show you let me see if I can find those clients that have the calcium shells. I have a couple. Um, I don't know if I did a guidebook for her because she does not do computers. No, let me try. That's the intake. Nope. All right, hang on. I'm just going to look up HTMA results and then see what I can find. HTMA. So she has, this one has both. Just don't want to find this other one. Any questions while I'm doing my searching here?
I'm just curious how frequently you see the calcium shell. Is it, in
I've only
comparison to
ever
your
seen a
whole?
couple.
Okay.
Um, I see four lows way more. Yeah, both of these are that one and that me. These are the two. And it was funny because I got them within like days of each other. All right.
Would your ratio basically show you like a high calcium and a low magnesium for
Yep,
the
let me show you
ratio?
the two that I have. And then all right, so here's this one.
Oh, they're both high.
They're both high. But then if you look at the ratios, you've got a pretty high calcium to magnesium.
Okay, yeah.
Calcium to potassium and calcium to phosphorus are all both super high also. But these two, and then this one, even more magnesium loss, right? High calcium. What you're seeing here is not high magnesium, it's a magnesium loss. So she's got so much calcium that it's driving a lower magnesium. She's losing it like in buckets through her hair because the calcium is so high that she can't hold on to magnesium to save her life. So this is where you can't look and take an HTMA at face value. When the calcium goes high and you see something like this, it's very, very often, and this is 25. So the top of this range right here, let me zoom in. Um, are you seeing this? You are, right? Or did you stop looking? Did you stop? I don't have a little green.
They're off the chart, so to speak.
Yeah,
Literally
yeah,
off the chart.
literally off the chart. Calcium's at 167, that's here, but this magnesium is 25. So this magnesium's like not on my screen. It's way above my screen. It's way, way up here. Because this is 17. This is 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. This is 21 up here. 25 is somewhere up at the top of my screen. So it is super high. So, I mean, like, it doesn't even fit on the chart. So she has such a huge calcium shell that she can't hold on to the magnesium. It's driving it super low in her body. And this person doesn't get blood work. She won't go to the doctor. So it's not that I can like compare it to what her labs say, but calcium's the body's going to hold it in the blood in a tighter ratio. So you're never going to see the huge skewing that you would see on an HTMA. So that when you go down here and look at her ratios, you know, but her calcium magnesium ratio on here looks pretty acceptable, right? So it's not necessarily, are we saying that it's a blood sugar issue right now? No, but there's definitely something going on. And how if she's losing magnesium at such a massive rate, then you've got to start thinking, look at her sodium magnesium ratio. Like, sad. Um, but that's a calcium shell. This one is also the beginning of a calcium shell. It's definitely somebody that I want to mitigate and make sure that this is going. Now she's got a different, her calcium ratio, magnesium ratios is going up. So she's definitely, for this person, I'm looking at a calcium shell, but I'm looking at 10.95. So what does that say on our where's our, no, here. So if she's got a ratio that's heading up towards 11, right? She's going to have more bouts with hypoglycemia than my calcium shell person who's keeping her blood sugars right, who's got a ratio at 7. Still calcium shells for both of them, right? But I'm way more concerned with this person's metabolism than I am with this person's metabolism, right? Did I lose you guys?
That's because of the ratio, right?
Right. I'm looking at the ratios, right? So the person that's got a bigger shell, right? She's got a higher calcium level, right? I'm definitely, I'm not even questioning the calcium shell on this one. She's up there. And I know her better. Like I know her history and what's going on. She's one of those people that's just like, yeah, you know, she has to just keep plugging along. She's the elder, taking care of her mom, taking care of her kids, picking up the pieces, dealing with her husband's health, dealing with the family situations, doing all the things, still out there working, right? If she doesn't have this calcium shell, she's crumpled on the floor. under the stress and weight of the responsibilities that she has. Because she's just got to keep plugging along. Doesn't matter what she thinks, right? She's just got to be there for everyone. She's the go-to person in her family.
So that's where a calcium shell is protective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's that emotional wall that she's built up so that nothing affects her. But the calcium's also not where it's supposed to be because she trips and breaks bones like crazy.
Mhm.
Well, and you'd have to be so careful to reduce this, right? Because I mean, that person to me would be so susceptible to like just crashing, probably emotionally as well as physically.
Yes. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
where it's a very low and slow process. You let them know what's going on. You talk to, I mean, it's one, it takes some time to break through, but this is the person where you start fixing their iodine deficiency and you start putting stuff in and all of a sudden they're crying at commercials and they're like, what the hell? Right? Like, what is going on? I don't cry.
Yeah.
This isn't me. Like, I'm the tough cookie in the family. I'm like I'm the one that, the buck stops here person. Like, this isn't me. You have to let them know that that might happen. All the, you know, and it might not be a good time for them. They might not be willing to do that. Like, it's definitely a conversation when this comes up on an HTMA.
Right? Because if you can't remove some of the stressors in their life,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's sort of a trade-off because she's also, I would think, at a very high risk for cardiac because you got all that calcium in the soft tissue or that can land in the soft tissues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
very possibly.
you're
I
setting
mean,
them up for a heart attack, but at the same time, if they need that to cope emotionally, you
yeah.
you really have to
Well, and you've got to look at,
figure out
yeah,
how to remove their stressors.
and you look at the other ratios, right? And say, what else is going on here? Um, she's definitely got some things happening here with these high ratios. She's got a couple that are like good, but then the super low sodium magnesium ratio, right? Because the calcium this is where, like, that there's not enough sodium and magnesium hanging around because the calcium's really mucking things up. So you've got it, and her potassium is I think her potassium, yeah, her potassium was 1, right? So, I mean, this is definitely not a good situation. She does not have calcium where it should be. She has a huge magnesium loss. So even though she has these two that are super, super high, the actual like bioavailable calcium and magnesium are probably down here to match the sodium and potassium. So when we fix this, do not be surprised at all in a client that looks like this if they end up in a 4 lows pattern. Because what you're seeing, right, is a magnesium loss and calcium that's not where it's that isn't able to do the jobs it's supposed to be doing. Right. It's obviously not in her bone.
So would someone there benefit from giving them like electrolytes?
Yeah. I mean, you definitely, I mean, I would, this person, I'm putting them on, um, I'm making sure that they're salting their food, making sure that they also are getting good potassium. I would probably um, use something like Ultima that has a more balanced sodium potassium ratio.
Okay.
All the
Would you avoid
while,
giving them would you avoid giving them something that also had magnesium in it? Would you avoid magnesium at this point?
no, but I mean, it's very possible that they're not going to hold on to it
Right, okay.
until we break up this calcium shell, which you can do by doing some very low dose iodine to start and then building that up. Um, I haven't really gotten into calcium shell because we haven't talked about iodine much. We kind of need to go there before you can really deal with a calcium shell.